While it is still fresh in my mind, I figured I would film my birth story, tell you guys what happened and how this little guy made his way into the world. So first, a little backstory. I had cholestasis with this pregnancy, which I had it with my last as well, so I was kind of familiar with what the implications of that were. I had to have a C-section with my first, and I knew I was probably going to have a C-section with my second as well. So because of that, I did have a C-section scheduled for when I was 39 weeks pregnant, which would have been June 27th. But as we got into June, I got my cholestasis levels rechecked and they had gone up. And so because of that, my C-section was actually pushed to Saturday, June 22nd. We still didn't make it to that date either. Father's Day, Sunday, June 16th. In the super early hours, 2:30 a.m., I woke up to pee for like the 15th time, and I noticed I was having some contractions. Well, they were getting more painful and they kept me up until around like 3:30ish in the morning. So I was like, okay. I pulled up the contraction timer on my phone. I was like, let's just see like if these are even consistent at all. So anyway, I timed my contractions from like 3:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. and they were consistently 5 to 7 minutes apart. I wouldn't say they were super painful, but they were getting like more painful as the hours went on. At 6 a.m. I was like, well, I'll just call the on-call nurse and see what she says, because you know, they're not super close together, but they are consistent. So I called and, you know, I told her what was going on. I told her also that, you know, while they're mostly 5 to 7 minutes apart, I was having some back-to-back that were 3 minutes apart. Contractions themselves were lasting about 1 minute. I told her that and she was like, well, it sounds like you are in labor. So she's like, you don't need to rush, but come on in and we can monitor you and check you and just see, like, determine if this is actual labor or a false alarm. So we went and dropped my toddler off with my parents, and we got to the hospital, probably around like 7:30 a.m. and I was in triage for a little over an hour. They checked to see if I was dilated, and I was 1/2 centimeter and like not thinned out at all. When they told me that, I was like crushed. I was like, okay, so you're telling me I'm gonna go through these painful contractions, they're gonna be consistent and not having any progress. I was like dooming that they were gonna send me home and I was just gonna have to be miserable at home. She's like, okay, well, let's give it an hour and I'll come back and check you again. And if you've made progress, like we'll make a decision then on what's gonna happen. But she came back in an hour and I was like a 2.5, 3 centimeters. So that was a sigh of relief, because the contractions were honestly getting pretty painful and I was like, if I'm not making any progress, like what is the point of all this right now? I just wanted pain meds, honestly. So I was hoping they would admit me and I could, you know, get the ball rolling on some pain meds. At that point, she told me, she was like, well, because you've had a C-section before, we can go ahead and do another. You can elect to have another C-section, or you can labor through this and attempt to have a vaginal birth. When she told me that, I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't know what to do, because originally I thought I would want to try for a VBAC just because the recovery time would be potentially quicker. And then at the same time, I had had a C-section before, so I felt comfortable going and doing that again. Eventually I just went with my gut, which was telling me to go ahead and do an elective C-section. I just had to choose what I felt like the most comfortable with at the time. I had asked the nurse, I'm like, what do you think I should do? And she was like, that is not my place to say. You can literally go either route. We can help you get through either, and that is totally up to you. So she didn't sway my decision either way. Neither did my husband. I asked him what he wanted me to do, and he said, you know, you're the one giving birth, so you choose what's going to be, you know, the best for you mentally, physically, all that. So I told her, I said, sign me up for a C-section. So at that point it was probably like 9 o'clock, and they told me that we would have to wait until 1 p.m. to do my C-section, because at like 5 a.m. that morning I had eaten a bowl of Reese's Puffs cereal, which now I regret, because if I hadn't eaten that bowl of cereal, they would have got me in a couple hours sooner for my C-section, which meant I wouldn't have had to deal with the contractions for as many hours, but what can you do? They got me admitted into our room and everything. My contractions were getting really bad by that point and really trying to breathe through them, but I felt like I was gonna split in half. I wanted an epidural, but I couldn't get an epidural because obviously we were waiting for my C-section and then we were gonna do the spinal blocks. They did tell me, they're like, okay, well, we can do fentanyl through the IV and that should take the edge off a little. I was like, absolutely, like, give me something because I am not having a good time. So I got my first dose of fentanyl at noon, and that first dose really did take the edge off. It only works for, they tell you one dose will work for an hour, but I felt like it worked for like 30 minutes. They were able to give me another dose, but the nurse told me, she's like, just so you're aware, like you can have another dose, but the second dose is never quite as effective as the first. And at that point, my contractions were just getting more intense, so I feel like the second dose didn't do much. I was in a lot of pain. Finally, it was 1 o'clock and they took me back to the OR where anesthesiologist could get started on the spinal, which, wow, that was like probably my least favorite part of the whole experience. Not because the spinal block like actually hurts getting it in or anything, but it was the fact that I was having really bad contractions while they were trying to put it in, and he had to try it 2 different times. So it took like 45 minutes before it was working and in and I was ready to go. So in those 45 minutes, you know, you're like sitting upright on the operating table and you have to like hunch over. My contractions were just coming really close together. I was on the verge of tears, and of course my husband couldn't be in there with me. They don't let the husband or support person in until you're like literally laid out on the table. But finally we got the spinal done. My husband was able to come in, and the actual C-section itself went really smoothly. I mean, it's not like fun to have a C-section, but I didn't feel a thing. And baby Wyatt was born. He weighed 8 pounds 5 ounces, which I was shocked because I was 37 weeks and 3 days. I did not expect to have an 8-pound baby. Yeah, he was a full-grown boy in there. He was ready to come out, so maybe that's why he put me in labor. And he was 21 inches long. And he has just been the sweetest little boy, and honestly, he's been a really easy baby. Waylon, my first, he was born at 37 weeks and 1 day, and he had a lot of problems with feeding. He didn't latch very well. He spit up a lot. And then this little guy was born also at 37 weeks, but he latched pretty much immediately. We haven't had issues with feeding or like reflux or anything like that. So just goes to show that every baby is so different. And I guess my body just likes to have 37 weekers. We ended up spending 2 nights in the hospital, which at least at our hospital, that's pretty standard if you have a C-section. Trying to think, I probably am forgetting something, but if you guys have any questions, drop them in the comments. I think what just surprised me the most was the fact that I went into labor on my own at 37 weeks. I will do like a separate video on like C-section recovery in general, because I feel like I have lots that I can talk about with that. Yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon.